the thing, though. It's like it permeates even our culture now. It permeates all of our films. It's all around us, and it is a copy of a higher thing. It's a yearning, a longing. And Lewis said that that's what joy is. It's that longing fulfilled. That if that longing for that typology, that narrative is fulfilled, that's when we experience joy. So we can have joy in pain and in sorrow and in difficult circumstances because our longing is being fulfilled in the person of Christ and his death and resurrection. Not by the external things going on in our life. Because the greatest human need is that. Not that everything goes well in our life from day to day. So, Lewis says we are made in God's image and we cannot exist apart from him. And it would make sense that we would have this craving. And it's this longing for fulfillment that creates the image. So the image in all of these things is from that longing. And then the amazing thing is the way God. So what I believe is that God purposely not only gives us that longing, not only has imprinted that on our hearts, but also works history to reflect that. And the Bible is a historical narrative. Okay, it's not, and that's one of the interesting things I learned from Lewis as well, is that he said, look, fiction, as we understand it, didn't even exist, until like the 17th century. So everyone who talks about the Bible as fiction didn't exist. There was myth, but it wasn't like this, kind of like realistic fiction that we have. No one had even thought of that. I know that's kind of weird to think about. Like, what do you mean no one thought of it? No one really had thought of it. Not like the way we understand it, not the way the Bible reads. It's a historical account. And yet you have this historical account where that Christ typology repeats over and over and over in a myriad of ways, where it mirrors itself. And, we get really confused, and I think it's one of the great tragedies in our church these days is in the way we subdivide, the Old Testament from the New Testament and say, okay, the Old Testament was the way God was dealing with people back then before Jesus, so let's not really look at that. Let's look at the New Testament because that's after Jesus, so that's the cool stuff about, grace and love and freedom and all that. So, let's look at that. But really, what the Old Testament about is constantly hammering the point of Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And that's what Jesus says when the Pharisees are like, who are you kind of thing. He's like, look, if you knew my word, if you knew my Father's word, you would know me because I'm everywhere. And here's some examples. And this comes from a pastor in Columbia, South Carolina, who wrote this book actually about this topic, Preaching Christ in the Old Testament. His name is Sinclair Ferguson. He's First Presbyterian in Columbia. And I have the pleasure of my associate pastor now. He was at his church, and the guy's from Scotland. If you have a chance to ever listen to him, he's got that great, Glasgow. I was telling Brian earlier, and when he says grace, he says grace. It's like let's charge him today off the bat. But he says, listen, he says Jesus, and we're going to get into this a little bit too. The idea of Jesus being the second Adam. Okay. The reversal of the first Adam. But he says Jesus is the true and better Adam who passed the test in the garden and whose obedience is imputed to us. And you think about the Garden of Gethsemane when he's like, Father, take this cup from me. He passes. That's the garden that Ferguson is talking about here. He passes the test in the garden. Jesus is the true and better Abel, though innocently slain, has blood now that cries out, not for our condemnation, but for our acquittal. Jesus is the true and better Abraham, who answered the call of God to leave all the comfortable and familiar and go out into the void, not knowing whether he went to create a new people of God, going out into that void. Jesus is the true and better Isaac, who was not just offered up by his father on the mount, but was truly sacrificed for us. And when God said to Abraham, "Now I know you love me because you did not withhold your son, your only son whom you love from me," now we can look at God taking his son up to the mountain and sacrificing him and say, "Now we know that you love us because you did not withhold your son, your only son whom you love from us." Jesus is the true and better Jacob, who wrestled and took the blow of justice we deserve. So we, like Jacob, only receive the wounds of grace to wake us up and discipline us. I like that, the wounds of grace. It talks in Hebrews about how the Father disciplines the Son that He loves, and that sometimes people think of discipline as like, you're getting punished for sinning. No. Well, I like what he says. He says, the wounds of grace. God, I tell people, we cling to these idols. We cling so hard, and sometimes God will break a finger to get our hand off it, And I'd rather not have a finger than like chase this idol into hell, you know what I mean? And it's these wounds of grace. God disciplines us the way we discipline ourselves if we're an athlete or if we're a student who wants to do well. We don't really enjoy the practice. I never did. I like to hit people in games, so I dealt with the practice so they let me, I like to move on in my career, so I take my classes and I discipline myself and sit down and study. And God disciplines those that He loves. He won't let us destroy ourselves with the things of this world. And sometimes that brings pain into our lives. It's not out of anger, it's out of love. So He's the true and better Jacob. Jesus is the true and better Joseph, who at the right hand of the king, and I need to know these stories, obviously I can't tell them all. Look them up if you don't remember them, but who at the right hand of the king forgives those who betrayed and sold him, and uses his new power to save them. Remember Joseph, right? His brothers sold him into slavery and told their father that he'd been killed. Jesus is the true and better Moses, who struck with the rod of God's justice. I skipped one there. Jesus is the true and better Moses, who stands in the gap between the people and the Lord and mediates a new covenant. Jesus is the true and better rock of Moses, who struck with the rod of God's justice, now gives us water in the desert. Jesus is the true and better Job, the truly innocent sufferer, who then intercedes for and saves his stupid friends. I like that one. Jesus is the true and better David, whose victory becomes his people's victory, though they never lifted a stone to accomplish it themselves. Jesus is the true and better Esther. And I'm back up on that one real quick. He's referring to David and Goliath, right? No one else lifted a stone. They were afraid. So this little guy goes up there and smacks him in the head. They never lifted a stone, but he saves them all. Okay? I never had really thought about it that way. Maybe just hear the story. Oh, he was faithful to God. He tried really hard. Yay for him. It's a typology of Christ. God was working out His grace through that story, through that historical moment, so that we can look at it and have a deeper understanding of what Jesus did. Jesus is the true and better Esther, who didn't just risk leaving an earthly palace, but lost the ultimate and heavenly one, who didn't just risk his life, but gave his life to save his people. And you guys remember the story of Esther. She goes before the king, and she's become his wife, and she's willing to risk hers, to say, hey, basically leave my people alone. Whatever we need to do. She risked her own life. Jesus is the true and better Jonah, who was cast out into the storm so that we can be brought in, and descends into the belly of, in Jesus' case, into the belly of the deep of the earth. Jesus is the real rock of Moses, the real Passover lamb, innocent, perfect, helpless, slain so the angel of death will pass over us. He's the true temple, the true prophet, the true priest, the true king, the true sacrifice, the true lamb, the true light, the true bread. So the Bible is really not about you. Okay? It's not, we shouldn't be looking at the Bible and say, oh, what does it say about me? What does it say about Jesus? It's about Him. Everything. Every word of it is about Him. It points to Him. It's pointing from the past towards Him, coming in the future. It's pointing from after He was here back to what He did and what it now means for us. And then I want to kind of shift that. So we see the typology of Christ in pagan literature. We see it in the biblical historical narrative.